Well, thank you so much for joining us. Silivea J here with Out of Bondage Music Radio Show and the Living Out of Bondage video show. We're again discussing with our pastoral panel how love is possible, but understanding is key. And I've asked Pastor Mike Ashcraft of Port City Community Church, Pastor Armour of St. Luke AME Church, and Pastor Ethan of the Bridge Church, Pastor Clifford Barnett of Warner Temple AME Zion. And I did say St. Luke AME, but it's St. Luke AME Zion Church.
That's okay.
I know about those AME folk. They get very sensitive.
We cousins. We are the family reunion together, so it don't matter.
Yeah, but as you all are leaders in your church and in the community, you're also my brothers in Christ. And so I wanted to just break bread with you as that starting off. None of us know everything that there is to know, but God knows. He knows exactly what he's doing with us. So we're just wanting to have a conversation. And I wanted to start off with what we have in common. And this has to be something funny. What would you say that just in general, just people in general, what would you say that we typically have in common?
People in general?
I'd say everybody's weird.
Everybody's weird. I've heard you say that before. Yes, everybody has weirdness.
We all got
yeah.
We all have something.
Everybody's weird. I think everybody gives their child that look at some points. Like, why would you? You may not say to them, we give them that look like, what? Everybody give their child that look at some point. Your child will take you there to give them that look. And I think everybody across the board goes through that.
Yeah, same.
Clifford and I, we like to make fun of each other. And so that common, and it's a steady competition to see who can embarrass each other the most.
Yeah. And he always wins. Yeah.
Music Mission 101 was a platform created just simply to use the lyrics of music. I mean, we all love music here, and we know the power that the lyrics of music have on us individually, but sometimes it doesn't translate into life. So that's what the hope is that we will change hearts and minds one lyric at a time. The discussion on race and equality or race and inequality is not something that we all thought that we would have right now. On the tail end of the pandemic, on top of, a proposed recession that people were talking about before. I mean, this is not a political program, but we didn't know that we would be here, but God does give us beauty for ashes. And I don't want to say that I'm happy about that it happened, but I'm glad to see that God is doing something even in the midst of this. What were your initial thoughts when we transitioned from the pandemic into what looked like it was going to be a movement that the church would need to lead in? I know a lot of you are already, have already done this in your churches about bringing about the conversation of equality. But I want to start with you, Pastor Ethan. Pastor Barnett, I interviewed you years ago after the Charleston shootings. In particularly, I wanted to hear from you concerning your most recent issue that you had. And I don't want to say issue, but you made the news after someone vandalized your church with racial slurs. So tell me what your experience has been revisiting that place with all that's going on.
Yes, I think there is a significant reality that is happening in our culture, in our country, that has been happening for a long time. And this is the racial disparity and the challenges that exist between various races. And I grew up in the Deep South in South Carolina, as a young white male, only really having the experience of kind of my experience and not really having much proximity to many others who were different than I was. And it wasn't until I was an adult where I actually had a meaningful friend who was a Jesus follower, who was also on staff at a church a few years ago, back in 2012, actually, with the same time the Trayvon Martin situation happened. And for the first time, I had a meaningful conversation and a meaningful friendship with a Black man who was a friend and a Jesus follower about his experience and some of what he has seen. And so that opened my eyes and began to open my eyes to, though I'll never have that experience, to be able to see things through a different lens. And that journey has brought me to a place here in Wilmington, North Carolina, where I have only learned more and more about our own history as a city and our own challenges as a city and our own disparities as a city that are affecting us. And then specifically, as you mentioned, we have a passion to be a multi-ethnic church, specifically in our city. And much of our teaching has to do with ethnic issues and racial issues, which I think are really central to the gospel itself. And so, yeah, just a few months ago, our building was vandalized by some pretty awful racial slurs, and that was a challenge. It was pretty devastating to our Black community. It was pretty shocking to our white community. Speaking of our church, and we had to come together and to unify and just recognize that we obviously don't know where it came from or what the intentions were, but it was painful and it was challenging and brought to the forefront that this isn't just some issue that's out there. No, this is right here.
What about you, Pastor Barnett? Since I about
Charleston. Well, and the first thing is Ethan and I are friends. We met at a pastor's breakfast at Snipes Academy, and we sat next to each other. God positioned us to be next to each other. So we've been friends, and so we've been working with this together. And so one of these things was when they defamed this building, we went over and helped wash it off. Yeah. So we had some of the members from our church come, and we washed it off. We sang, we prayed together, and we started continuing to work. Yeah, we started continuing to work. So, as you asked me, what has this taught me? First of all, I think that what's going on now really brings me hope. It brings me hope because here's what I see. I actually see, especially when I look at the protest, I see great-great-grandchildren of slave owners, and I see great-great-grandchildren of slaves together saying, hey, we got to make a change. And that just brings me so much hope because I think God positioned it such a neat way, in that we were in a pandemic, you were isolated at home. The person who had his knees on George Floyd's neck appeared to have no empathy at all. All of those things falling in place. And then God says, okay, open your eyes. Like Ethan says about his congregation. Some people saw something for the first time. And so my goal is, as I tell people all the time, now that you know, what are you going to do differently?
I've heard it say, my grandfather used to say, what's popular, he was a minister. And he used to say, what's popular is not always right. And what's right is not always popular.
Silivea, I agree. I'm not at all, gleeful in any stretch that we're enduring a pandemic. It's very real, and a lot of people have been hurt really bad. I think for me, and I don't know, is it? I think certainly it's the Lord. I think that there's an acuteness to what we were all feeling because of the pandemic and the shutdown and the pace and just that heightened sense of, I don't want to say fear because that wasn't what it was for me, but certainly an acute kind of awareness of what was going on allowed me to process this in a way that I'm pretty sure I would not have if the pace of life were, quote, normal the way it was. And, mine personally began with Ahmaud Arbery and just trying to wrestle with the obvious, because it's obvious. And obviously, not wanting to say the wrong thing was a big part of it, and really just wrestling through some things. And I'd been involved in conversations around race and racial reconciliation and social justice or racial inequality and justice for 5 or 6 years, pretty, I wouldn't say intensely, but certainly intentionally, and just reading a lot and learning a lot and trying to process it in my own head with conversations with people that I knew. And when this happened, I felt like this was a chance for us to, and the way I've been phrasing this now is not to speak out on something, but rather to wade into something, to step into something that I wasn't fully comfortable with and was convinced I wasn't fully aware of. But at the same time, felt like a church, and I say like ours, we're probably majority white, but for a church like ours to be able to start talking about this, and the phrase we've been using is leaning into this concept or this issue, which I don't even like that phrase, but I knew that was something God was calling us into. I did not know what the picture, certainly did not know what would happen with George Floyd and what would unfold from there, but certainly felt prompted from the Holy Spirit to at least begin to seek perspective and to bring perspective for our congregation to begin to process something that we all knew was going to be very difficult.
Well said. It's good to know that you've been doing this all along. And what about you, Pastor Armour? Because I know that this is not a new front for you either. Did it impact you?
Right. I think that where I am now, I wasn't in the beginning. In the beginning, it was the old R&B song that says, here I go again. Mm-hmm. That's how it actually felt with this. It brings up memories of Oscar Grant and Trayvon Martin, Sandra Bland. You kind of run these things through your head. Mm-hmm. And then you get to talking to your other Black pastors, your Black family members, you're talking to your spouses, and it's contained in the Black household. A space. Mm-hmm. So that's where it was. Now I'm at the Kumbaya, and it'd be all over in the morning, and I'm there with the scriptures of what will hurt you now will help you later, but I wasn't there in the beginning. I was not there. There were real feelings and real emotions. Wow. Right? And I ain't want to hear no scripture. I ain't want that. But I had to pull it together because we had to have once again more candid conversations with our children about it. So and we did this before with Trayvon. We did this with Oscar Grant, and we did this with Tamir Wright. And so, but what is different now? And I don't speak for the whole African American community or population at all. But what I think is different is that for the very first time, the cross-pollination of conversation between Black and white about the same issue is absolutely amazing.
It's amazing.
And so Mike can attest to that. It's like we're talking about it now. When before, just me and the brothers talking about it. But now I'm talking about it with my white brothers. And so that to me becomes the change. So where I am now is more hope when before it was a lot of hurt. So I'm on an upswing with it now, and I think that hope is inevitable at this point.
And there's a sincerity that's in the air now. Yeah. It's not there before on both sides. The one thing that I take away from it is I've had to say to my white friends, this is not your problem, right? But you are part of the solution. Mm-hmm. You did not do this individually, and to not feel a sense of blame. I think when we look at people in our family, and there are a lot of people with multicultural families, you don't go and blame your family that looks different from you. And the same thing is kind of like with the church family. I love how Pastor Mike, you said my church is mostly white. It's funny, you really don't know in this day and age of internet. And I listen a lot to Joyce Meyer too. It's funny, the people that you can look at, some of the televangelists that we listen to a lot, the church has probably unified a lot sooner than the world has. If we look at Billy Graham and some of the other, settings, but for individuals who are in leadership to be impacted, I think you would have to first see it from the perspective of your members. Mm-hmm. How do you encourage that? You have that sensitivity because you're pastoring people from all walks of life. Mm-hmm. But how do you encourage that sense of ordinary dialogue and normal discussion to happen from the sanctuary into the real lives of your members without polarizing, groups of people? You don't want certain people to feel guilty that, we're tired of talking about this. Why are we still talking about this? Where do you start to transition? Do you do it through history? Where do you begin? And if you don't know, I mean, because we kind of don't know. It's kind of taken on its own leap. Where do you begin? Where did you feel that you needed to begin after you saw the narrative? Okay, I've got to do something about this. I'm doing a lot of talking, guys. Jump in. Where do you do that? This is supposed to be messy. It's not supposed to be orderly.
Well, I'll jump in. I think that for me, it was, because not knowing where to begin is very, very frightening. And, Jermaine, what you said was, the sentiment I got was there was just hurt. And, what I had to do is, and I talked to one of my friends, and he said, because we were talking about this, and what I began to do was just ask about people's experience. I had several Black friends, and we had some conversations about race, but I never, really pressed in. It's like, tell me like what you really feel or think. So I just went, I had 3 or 4 people reach out to me as well. And I just picked up the phone and just said, how are you doing? And what I heard is very similar. I'm hurt. I'm not surprised, or here we go again. That was the sentiment. And then what I heard was some, this tendency to be frustrated with, like, now all my white friends are like, did you know this is a big problem? They're like, we've been talking about this for years and years. And I'm one of, I'm among those. Mm-hmm. I've heard these stories before. I'm familiar with Trayvon Martin. I did not think the same way about Trayvon Martin as I think today. I did not know. And so part of what I thought was really interesting for our churches and for churches, what you have to do is you have to get ahead of things so that people don't wonder. I think, Silivea, you said this. They don't go, why are you bringing this up again?
We've been talking about it. Mm-hmm.
Right. This can't become an issue that gets drudged up whenever something happens. This has to be a way in which we fundamentally see the redemptive plan of God's kingdom and work in this world, so that when we're pursuing that, we're not pursuing racial justice as a sidebar item. It is actually an essential part of what it means to pursue life in God's kingdom. And when we can set a vision like that, then a conversation about race doesn't feel like you're dragging something up. It feels like you're continuing something that you have begun. So my posture was, because this was the first time our church had probably spoken out, and I'm using that phrase, that publicly regarding race. I knew I'd get some pushback and such, but I wanted to make it about understanding, because it's not about trying to get, let me give to you all the, because that's what everybody does. Well, here's all the facts about this, and here's all the facts, and they do it on both sides, and it never works. But when I say, Jermaine, what's your story? And you tell me what you feel and what you see and what you've experienced, I then have to reckon that in my own soul as a brother, as someone who cares about you or with anybody. And so that's where my processing began, was who do I know? And I mean, I had friends of my kids, and I would just ask questions. Mm-hmm. And they go, oh, wow, you like care about this. And I'm going, well, I'm learning too. I'm learning, because sometimes I didn't, it wasn't there. So that's what I think we have to do collectively with our churches, is really create a posture, or with our church, create a posture of understanding. And what we're teaching in our church, when I'm saying this, is that when you lean into understand, it's actually the first step in learning to care. And we have to care about people enough to make this important to all of us, for all of us.
You wanna jump in there, Pastor Barnett?
Well, I think that, what the church has to do is, what I try to teach my folks is, number one, first with the racial piece, is I tell my African-American congregation to tell the white people that they know that to stop beating themselves up.
There you go.
That's the first thing I say, is stop beating yourself up. And then the second thing I tell them is to model grace, because that's what Jesus would do. Jesus would model grace, you'd back up. But then the third thing I tell them, and this is where we go to the action piece, is, but now that you know differently, now that you know, you've got to do something different. Now that you know, we need to work on sustainable changes. We need to work on things that will make a difference later on. So I encourage people to vote. I encourage people to go to the polls. As a matter of fact, we passed out. This is an application for an absentee ballot. We ask them to do that. We make sure people sign up for the census, things like that. But we also say you got to model it, And so I say to everybody, so now that you know better, now that you know, man, do differently. And I'm looking for this conversation to happen July 2021 and July 2022 and July 2023. See, I don't want it to just be quote unquote a movement or just be an opportunity to just protest, but we need that sustainable change, stuff that's going to last a long time.
I'll just say something briefly and I'll defer to Clifford, but we have recognized that much of what we have learned in school and through history is a perspective and is a limited amount of history. And whether it's things locally in our city, like the 1898 race massacre, whether it's the Wilmington 10, whether it's, a litany of other things. And then as well, just outside of Wilmington nationally, just a real quick thing we do, and I don't think that we have the greatest, solution or answer to this, but we do we're a multi-ethnic church, but we're predominantly a white church. But for February, during Black History Month, we celebrate that and we talk about that.
Wow.
And because we've learned through Clifford and through others that it was the church that was really the vehicle of education, of history, of real things. And so when you're not getting that other places, so we actually have taken that, and every Sunday, and we do this in a variety of different ways, but we utilize our worship and our gatherings and our ministries for the sake of education, to demonstrate the value, of specifically of Black Americans and, in our country.
And I've been to his church, and during the February month, they actually sing, Lift Every Voice and Sing. They sing Lift Every Voice.
Now
they actually do that, yeah.
We're going to talk about that on the next session that we have together, guys, because that's just so unique.
But it has to go even beyond that, because then what also Ethan does is he allows African Americans to visit his church and to teach and to talk, and we've done workshops together. We had some comedians come together. We invite people of different races to come to our church as well. And one of the things that I always tell people is that, for example, with kids will never become anything they don't see.
That's right.
For my kids, if I want them to become a lawyer or a doctor or a teacher or whatever, I have to bring those people in that they can see become that. But also, what I tell the white Americans is be careful, because sometimes our perception of the Black church is from what we see on television.
Yes.
American.
And you, Pastor?
It's a balance of making sure that our people are less Nat Turner and more Martin Luther King.
There you go.
Because I pastor a church, not a community organization, not a civic group, not a nonprofit, tax exempt, but not a nonprofit. I pastor a church, so the ultimate foundation for us is love. So I found myself on my prayer line when different situations happened, when it came to any kind of brutality against an African American. In this case, we're talking about police officers, encouraging my church that we still have to love. Not just encouragement, but a reminder that up from slavery, from Jim Crow to Jane Crow to civil rights, the GI Bill, everything that seemed to be discriminatory against African Americans, we got over that. We were very resilient. And so to focus on the resilience that it's not all white people and it's not all cops. So you also have to be very objective. So it is a time for me, because of the matrix and the principles that I believe, on Christ the solid rock I stand. So I'm going to teach love. I'm going to teach community. I'm going to teach fortitude. We're going to teach resilience. We're going to remind ourselves of every African American that made it through worse times than this, and we're going to get this. So our Zooms or our prayer lines have been celebrations that we can do this, that we've been. Ty Tribbett is everybody's favorite song at St. Luke, that if he did it before, he can do it again. So it's always been that way, because we've been through this all the time. And it brings it all back to the message of Christ, that I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I took time Sunday or this weekend to hug on the dads. And any father that came through, we ended up feeding about 100 fathers on Saturday. Any dad that came through, we were going to metaphorically put our arms around them because, we got a 6 feet distance, but we just fed them. And I thought that Sunday I would just kind of uplift fathers, period. Fathers, whoever it was, fathers, period. We're going to lift them up instead of dragging them down and talking about statistics of Black fathers are not there, because to me, that's a Christian message. And so that becomes the foundation, and that's kind of shaping where we are right now, because we really have been through this before. And so that's what we've been pushing, the love of Christ, and that will, to me, it will get you through everything. It does conquer all. So that's what we've been.
Yeah, and Jermaine, I will tell you, I need you telling me that as well. Because I think one of the things that's so important is when you say that, it's very easy then for a white pastor to say, "Oh, good, that's just more resiliency." And what I think our postures, we hear you saying, because I'm 100%, I believe that 100%, is for us to say, we as brothers need to come in. This is not just your burden to carry. This is our burden to carry. And when I'm thankful that you are resilient and that you have been able to lead in that capacity. And what I want to do is not use it as an excuse to perpetuate problems that have existed, but rather actually shoulder up with you and figure out how we can learn and live together in a world that actually, and at least in a community where Christ is ruled, where it can be fundamentally different than what the rest of the world sees and experiences.
Right.
And so I just say that's a message that we all need. That's so freeing for me to hear.
And I love how you said shoulder up, you guys shouldering up together, because I think that's what it's going to take for us as congregants to understand that this is a message of Christ. This is not a message for mainstream media to push. This is a message that every believing body member should be joined and aligned with. We should be having, I actually really wanted to make this sort of like a video Zoom conference. We love to have conferences, but I think, understanding, under the umbrella of understanding comes what we have in common. And I mean, I have no formal organization for this. That's what you guys do. I'm a lay member doing something, not doing nothing.
Right. That's right. Doing important work.
There you go.
Creating platforms.
And so the idea that we can come together and talk about what we have in common. I think a life matters, whether that's Black life, a woman's life, a white male's life matters when people have understanding. There are times that people may have been led, say, for example, you've seen Black women minister to white men because the Lord led them to. What are those stumbling blocks that cause us to not see each other's needs? It's a lack of understanding. It's a lack of our history, knowing the history of there are women who were inventors. Not all pastors are evil. I think that the greater understanding has to come through these dialogues, through this conversation. But where do you begin to bridge those churches together? What does that look like in terms of a community type of conference coming together?
I think you start having those conversations in the lunch counter, on your job, kids that go to the same school, and their parents go and sit at a basketball game. You start having those conversations where you invite them in. But to invite them, you've got to model Christian attitudes, Christian behavior.
That's the key. That is the key.
I'm not going to come to your church and you're cussing at me. I'm not going to come to your church and you treat me like I'm not human. But
so love is possible, but you have to have, they have to have understanding that you're actually following Christ in your real life.
Absolutely. And I got to see that. See, and you don't have to put on a t-shirt. I've got to see it modeled. I've got to see you by the way you treat the kids on the soccer team, or to treat the people that you work for or work for you that can't give you anything back. I got to see it.
And Jesus said you'll know them. And Jesus said you'll know them by their fruit. You'll know them by their fruit.
I'm not going to come just because you invite me. I'm not going to come just because you invite me. No.
I think this is a really, really sensitive and just really delicate conversation that it has to become a kingdom conversation that we talk about. Because I have a vision and I have a passion to lead a multi-ethnic church and to see that manifested kind of in our city. And so that like, as Clifford said, the point isn't just multi-ethnic gatherings or events or church services, but it's multi-ethnic dinner tables. And so that's kind of, that's what we're really after. But in the process, yes, I love the Black church. I had a friend recently in a conversation who said he thinks the Black church is the most biblically faithful expression of the church that has existed over the past few hundred years. And I would say, I think I agree with that. And so I think we have to have a conversation that it's interesting that white people, Black people might be more okay with migrating to a white setting, but white people don't have the same eagerness to go to a Black setting. And I think there's a lot of stuff that happens there. And I think we need to talk about that because
I think so.
But if I could say one thing before we answer that question, I have a good friend of mine who I've gotten to know over the years. And that's when, we had the first, why is everything about race? We had those conversations. And it's when I began to learn, man, if this is important to you, then it needs to be important to me. And that was a part of my beginning point. And that's part of the reason I've been so emotional in this season is you see something that happens in Minneapolis, or you see something happens in Atlanta, or you see something happens, and you can very easily realize, I don't have to care about this. And it bothered me so deeply because I remember thinking how can I become so indifferent? And really to allow myself to care and to be bothered enough to care. And that's when I just began to pick up the phone and call and listen and hear. And when you sort of get those stories, you realize we've got to stay in this. And that's why we've got to create a longer view of this. And we've got to recognize in our own lives how easy it is to get back into our lanes and not be bothered by things that we just don't want to be bothered by. And that's what I'm working hard to resist right now, and just to keep a long view of this. So I hope that made sense.
It makes all the sense in the world. Pastor Jermaine, I know you want to say something and jump in, and I commend a lot of the white pastors who are becoming a part of the conversation, because this is a lifestyle for us. It really is, man. It's really a lifestyle that we've had to endure. And I think unconsciously, it just wasn't on the radar. But I think that there was an officer involved shooting a couple of years ago where you saw on tape the guy running away and being shot in the back. But that didn't garner a whole bunch. It was all over the news, but it didn't garner a lot of attention like Minneapolis did. I mean, we all saw that, right? And so I think that was an awakening again for African Americans, but an enlightenment for white America. And with that awakening again for us and that enlightenment, it's almost like we're coming together and having these conversations. The Bible says, come, let us reason together. And we had not done that before. So, I mean, I really commend, the pastors who are just kind of joining the conversation. And it's like, let me kind of introduce you to my world, because I was in my silos with my guys, because I didn't think that, that you even cared, or we weren't giving out the information. But now you see the care and you see the heart, and you see that we're going to have to, if we ever going to heal this, it's going to have to be together. I mean, it is going to have to be together. And for a church to lead it, a church has to be very inclusive. Any other group may have the leverage to be divisive, but we can't. We have to do it together. Yes. And so I think that's where we're going. And I'm so glad that you brought that point up, because even though I didn't have that as it was a question in the back of my mind. One of the things that we chose to do was to integrate ourselves. So often we love to quote Martin Luther King when he said that Sunday morning is the most segregated time in America. I ask myself, and I and my family, we ask ourselves, what are we doing about it as Black people? Are we integrating ourselves, or are we doing much of the same that we've been doing? And you feel this push, you feel this call to come out of whatever you are. And we love to say in the African American community that people are church hoppers, so to speak. They go from one church to the next church to the next church. Right. But we never, sometimes, not everyone, but some people never see the body of Christ as this organic thing that, it is a living body. And you may be called to Afghanistan, you may be called to Africa, you may be called to Washington, D.C., but if you're on a missionary trip, then that's okay. But what if your mission is to leave the congregation that you've known all of your life and go to some place where you may be different?
Right.
And when do we, as African Americans, how do we evoke those conversations that maybe invite someone to church that doesn't look like you, opposed to wondering why people who look like you are going to a different type of church? Where does that integration begin? And that's that may not be for this setting, but that's one of the things that is in the back of my mind, is that there's a role that Black America has to play in making sure that integration is fully achieved in church. It's like, oh, we overcame in business, we overcame in this, but we're not going to mix our religion with each other. We're not doing that.
Right. I think the word that you mentioned before, and Mike mentioned as well, is understanding. And we have to understand now. I challenge my church from a point about when David was running from Saul. Mike, remember, he was running from Saul, and he ran to the church and he asked the priest Abimelech, give me some bread. And the priest said, I don't have nothing but holy bread. And he said, we ain't got no more regular bread, we got holy bread. And David said, give me the holy bread. And so I'm challenging my church that as we go back to church, whenever that is, that as a pastor, I repented from giving my people regular bread. I now have to give you holy bread. I now have to take you to a new level of teaching, right?
Yes.
I now have to teach you serious things of the Word of God. Yeah, I heard a preacher once say the best sermons are not on the lines, it's between the lines. I have to begin to look deep to give you that holy word and to give you that understanding that witness is when me and you talk. Witness is me and when me and Mike talk. Witness about God is when me and Silivea talk. But evangelism is talking to somebody else who doesn't know Christ.
That's right.
It doesn't matter what color
what they look like.
They just don't know Christ, right? Mm-hmm. Whoever doesn't know Christ, that's what evangelism becomes. So me and Tanya, my wife, were watching the 30 for 30 last night, Bruce Lee. And Bruce Lee said that what separates people is styles, and then styles become law. That's what separates me and Mike Church. It's the styles of worship that we have. We both teaching the same gospel, teaching to the same God. We both got love in our heart for our people. He and I both love one another. But what separates us on Sunday? It's styles, and then styles become law. Now we have to break that law. We have to break down that law of style and just say, hey, come over. You come over here, we come over there. We have to break that style, but we have to begin to give our people that kind of understanding so they can have new information as they move forward, especially after this season.